Well, I work in a department that tries to understand and study and explore the dynamics of science, technology, innovation, and other forms of knowledge in developing countries. It is in peripheral context. And we do this because we are ultimately interested in development, in the development of our region of Latin America. And in doing that, we have studied the process, the history of the construction of institutions, of scientific institutions, of technological institutions, and on the way, we became really interested, fascinated, and appalled by the problem of the institutional setting more generally, not just for science and technology and the role of scientists in our countries. And so I can say that, for example, that we have a paper that was written in 2001 by Acemoglu and his colleagues, showing that the mortality rate of early European settlers in a given colony determined whether they would decide to establish resource extractive plundering institutions or to settle there in those countries and then build European style of institutions. And in particular, those institutions that protected property. And property has been basic to the development of modernity. And then we find that there is a transposition, a transfer of European institution models to the world over, either directly by Europeans and then Americans and other people from the developed world, or willingly asked by the new nations that wanted to adopt modernity or to reach modernity, and so they wanted to have European institutions. But the problem then that one faces is the quality of institutions. Quality of institutions matter, right? And what we find is that a weak institutional framework has enormous human costs and adds to inequality and inequity problems. And so the South has typically inherited European institutions, but often in a weak, in a deformed version. And this continues to be a source of inequality. And I have several examples, but perhaps I can give them later. Yeah, sure. Okay? Thank you. Konrad.
As you already introduced me, I'm working for an organization of more than 1,000 cities in 68 countries that are particularly dedicated to sustainable development issues. And this organization was founded in 1990 at the United Nations headquarters in New York and has since grown to the size that we have at this moment, and it's still growing. So we consider ourselves not only to be an association, but we sometimes refer to us as a movement because we actually try to bring cities together to join campaigns and programs like Local Agenda 21 or the Cities for Climate Protection campaign. And so while we were over 15 years helping cities to engage in Local Agenda 21, and this means, again, to provide guidance to them how to engage the local community and the stakeholders on a long-term vision for that community, where they want to go, how they see their future. And while we were guiding them to actually conduct scenario exercises and to see what the particular potential of that community was, of that location was, and so what they could dwell on in their future development, and also looking at the needs and desires of the local communities, we were observing that many of them really came to understand the global scenarios, what we are facing in terms of availability of natural resources, the shrinking natural resource base, peak oil, all these kind of things that humankind is facing in terms of demography and health. So all these developments, and actually their efforts were often in many places condensed or focused in calculating the ecological footprint of the community. So to which extent do we, with the way we are living, to which extent do we use or need global hectares somewhere else in order to supply us. And of course, then we came to compare and saw, and other organizations like WWF are doing these exercises all the time and providing impressive charts. There is a huge difference in what communities use in terms of resources in order to live in the way they live. No one can say, okay, a poor community, they're all unhappy because they are poor and they are under average in terms of their resource use. And another one is having, let's say, 20 times of the resource use of the average or so, and they must be very happy because they have all the resources available. And of course, there is no happiness index in the world, but if you look at that, and if you look at people, then you see that there's a huge gap. You see an Indonesian little boy sitting in the sand in a rural area, playing with almost nothing, being extremely happy. And I've recently met a banker who was extremely unhappy because he has lost 75% of his 800 million that he has had before. And he was extremely unhappy, close to suicide. So what does it mean? It means that when we compare situations, and the title of this session is Global Equity, Local Needs, there is not something like general average local needs. You can be happy with little, and the global equity is probably not even necessary to achieve in order to have local satisfaction and local happiness. So I just let it, I just only go so far before I maybe later explain a little bit more why I have brought this now into the discussion.
Great, thank you. We're beginning to slaughter the cows, so that's great. Flavia, please.
Very good, thank you very much. Let me say just in 2 words what UNV, and that is the only acronym that I will try to stick to, the United Nations Volunteers, is all about. We are the United Nations program that promotes peace and development by means of volunteerism. We believe that it is essential for societies and individuals to contribute, to take themselves ownership and not just expect action to come from governments or from donors. We field 8,000 volunteers worldwide every year, and we have many more additional who contribute online. Just to give a concrete example, to just explain what we do, let's look at the image that Professor Ursula has just shown us of the impact of Hurricane Stan. What we typically would do with our partners, upon request of government, of course, would be to send volunteers to those areas to do 2 things. One, obviously, the immediate relief, the response on a voluntary basis through the commitment that those who contribute and volunteer feel towards those in need, to the immediate relief and recovery effort. But this is not enough, because this at best goes back to creating attaining the vulnerability level of before, and that ain't good enough. What is important is really to work with the communities to build up the capacities, the resilience to respond. And in order to do that, it is essential to not come in with our, which we often do, I think, donors, bilaterals, in multilateral organizations, even governments. We go into societies and communities thinking that we have the answers. In reality, we have to work together with those who have direct experience of the needs and the opportunities in order to find the best solution. And this is a pet peeve of mine, but I'm always wondering, how is it that in the United Nations we pay so little attention to anthropological analysis before we engage with programs? Applies to the UN, to the World Bank, as far as I know, to many bilaterals. We do not understand. That is the first step to knowing what the local needs are.